Okay. I guess if nobody else wants to do it, I will take notes. Okay.
Should we start?
Let's do it.
Okay. Did you start recording one? Okay. Hi everybody. Today is April 29th. This is the office hours for a cluster API provider for Azure. We follow the CNCF meeting guidelines, so please be kind to each other and raise your hand if you have any questions or have any comments. And please add your names to the attendees list. And this is also being recorded. So let's get started. I see the recurring topics. Do we have any new members that would like to introduce themselves or say a couple of words? Not a lot of people, so probably not. Okay, other than that, I see we have in our list of discussion topics a demo by Eugene.
Right.
Are you ready to do that, Eugene? Or
Yeah, I can take it.
okay. I'm gonna probably have to stop sharing, and David, if you don't mind, I think you're gonna have to allow him to share his screen. So I'm not sharing.
Yeah, so host disabled participant screen sharing.
Yeah, David is gonna give you access.
Eugene, you should be able to share your screen.
Yep, I am. Thank you.
Excellent.
Ooh. Okay. How can I share the whole screen, not a window? Okay, let's go with this first. So again, my name is Eugene Fedorenko. I'm working on CSE team, DevOps and infrastructure, and currently our scenario that we are working on, that we are digging into, is related to DevOps for cloud native applications, related to mostly our focus is about GitOps. And besides just trivial, regular GitOps operations that are related to deployment of applications, we are looking at the whole big picture, including provisioning and updating the infrastructure where those applications are running on. And actually, the question which is coming out is there any tool set that we can use in order to do that in the same very GitOps fashion? So without any push-based pipelines with direct access to the cluster from our DevOps orchestrator. And actually, fortunately, we came across Katya and Kamzi. Actually, I'm very excited about this project, and just because of its nature, because of its design and architecture, it opens a wide door for GitOps, a wide door of provisioning Kubernetes clusters with GitOps. And on this diagram, so this is actually the overall picture of the area where we are currently focused on. So it's pretty high level, and its main purpose is to set the scope boundaries and to understand how different work streams are connected to each other. So here there are two roles, which we call platform administrator and development teams. So the development team is involved with developing the business applications and its features, while the platform team takes care of the platform, of the infrastructure that hosts these services, these applications. So let's say there are a number of development teams. Each of them runs its own software development lifecycle to develop applications. They have their code repository, CI/CD pipelines, and eventually they release a new version of the application. And this new version of the application is represented by a Docker image stored in some container registry and by manifests describing how to deploy the application to an environment, to a Kubernetes cluster. And these manifests are stored in the manifest repository. So this is the output of the software development lifecycle of the development team. So then they're happy with that, but what they really need in order to support their development lifecycle is, in this case, cloud native applications, is Kubernetes resources. So they go to the platform administrator tendering and ask them, please give us some piece of your mighty compute. The platform administrator answers no problem and makes necessary configurations in the fleet repository. This guide contains all the information about what clusters are available, what configurations are applied to those clusters, and what teams, tenants with their applications share Kubernetes clusters. So having done that, having applied configurations here, a team will have a dedicated space in the existing compute. And the platform administrator may also decide to provision a new Kubernetes cluster and give it to the team. And the platform administrator will add to this Kubernetes cluster to the fleet. So for that purpose, they can use two options. They can use an IAC pipeline with Terraform to provision a cluster and to install Flux on it, pointing to the fleet repository. With this done, Flux will install all required configurations and workloads on the cluster. Another option for a platform administrator to provision a new cluster, which is way cooler, is to use Copy. So they can define Copy resources in this fleet repository. These resources will be delivered to the management cluster by Flux, and Copy runtime will provision a new cluster. That Flux will remotely install all necessary configurations on the new cluster, including Teams applications. So the fleet repo, this guy, so it serves as a joint point that connects all pieces together. Like I said, it's maintained by the platform administrator team, and it contains information about what infrastructure applications and configurations should be applied across clusters in the fleet. For example, like Nginx controllers, threat managers, service accounts, and so on. It contains information about what clusters or cluster groups are included in the fleet, how environments like dev, test, prod are distributed across the fleet, what teams share the clusters and what team applications should be running on those clusters. This repo also contains any cluster-specific configurations for infrastructure applications, such as, again, ingress rules, port numbers, storage accounts that might be specific for every cluster or cluster group. There's a prototype. So you still see PowerPoint, right? You don't see my Safari browser.
No, we just see PowerPoint. Yeah.
Okay. So let me change that. Yep. Now there's Safari browser, right? So yeah, there's a prototype or sample of this repository on GitHub. So in this sample, we targeted to cover a broad generic use case when an organization has a fleet of Kubernetes clusters with multiple environments hosted on that fleet with a number of development teams with their applications working on these clusters with centralized configurations and with the ability of fine-tuning per cluster group or per cluster. So So this repo actually contains detailed information about how it's organized, what folders are there, and how actually Flux performs the reconciliation of all those applications and configurations. But this repo, besides storing configurations and applications, so this repo also serves as a storage of cluster definitions in terms of copy resources. So this is, like I said, an alternative approach to provisioning clusters, but it's very cool and promising. And with it, we can handle the whole process, the whole loop in pure pull-based GitOps fashion, without any push-based IC pipelines, totally declaratively, so that I just add a new cluster to the Fleet repo, PR it, and basically that's it. And the PR is merged. In a while, a new cluster magically pops up with Flux installed on it, and with all required in my organization infrastructure set up and running. So, for example, let's change the sharing. For example, guys, what do you see now on the screen?
You see the VS Code?
It's not that VS Code. It's not that VS Code. Manifest. Not that. Yeah, so for example, I'm going to add a new cluster here to my Fleet repository. And just defining a Helm chart with some values for this cluster. So the whole definition of copy resources are encapsulated in actual Helm chart. And here I'm just defining Flux Helm release, consuming this Flux this Helm chart, and providing some values like name of the resource group, name of the agent pool name, and so on. So I'm just adding it and committing it. And basically, that's it. So I'm not running any scripts or pipelines. I'm basically literally doing nothing, just talking. Flux and copy are working for me. So there is a management cluster. There's a management cluster which observes my Fleet repository and applies all the changes to it, such as provisioning of a new cluster. And the whole process, it takes some time, but eventually, again, change the sharing. Eventually, there will be a cluster like its brother West AKS. So there will be a cluster with everything installed on it, everything which is defined in my Fleet repository in terms of infrastructure. So it has Flux system installed on it and Nginx controller installed on it. So this is kind of my set of infra that I want to be installed on this cluster. So if I configure more in my clusters, I will have more workloads installed here. Management cluster, in my case, is actually, it can be actually any Kubernetes cluster, and in my case, it's just K3D running local on my laptop. So again, its purpose is to observe the fleet repository and provision or update workload clusters that run the workloads. So it should have GitOps operator, like I'm using Flux, and copy capz runtime installed. So once a new cluster is defined in the fleet repository, Flux cluster customization reconciles a Helm release and creates the copy resources in the cluster. Copy capz sees these new resources and brings them to the desired state by provisioning resources in reality in the cloud in Azure. Cluster Helm chart also defines Flux system and Flux infra customization. The first one remotely installed Flux on the new provisioned cluster, so it can manage its workloads independently. And the infra customization is responsible for installing all required infrastructure configurations on the new cluster. In my case, it was infra. It was Nginx controller. So this infra customization remotely creates a Flux Nginx Helm release on this new cluster, which in turn will fetch the Nginx Helm chart from internet and install it on the cluster. So basically, this is what I wanted to show. This is what we are focusing on in terms of copy and capz. Any questions here?
Okay, Eugene, that sounds pretty cool. I don't see any hands raised. If anybody has a question, please go ahead.
Okay, so this is an interesting and promising way of provisioning Kubernetes resources, and it's obviously currently is a great option for self-managed Kubernetes clusters on Azure. But we and our customers are mostly interested in provisioning managed AKS clusters. So in a parallel workload to this one, we evaluated secure AKS baseline pattern. So this is an official Microsoft answer and recommendations for production-ready AKS clusters. And we asked ourselves if we can use copy to provision a secure AKS cluster. So we found a few gets and reported in this issue. Let me bring it up. Yes, so I opened this issue. So there are like a comparison table. Basically, this is what should be done to the cluster in order to meet the requirements of secure AKS baseline. Either it is provisioned, like in terms of provisioning, or it's just installed by Flux as a configuration, as a workload on top of provisioned Kubernetes cluster. And here's can we do that or not with copy on capz? And there are like 3, 4 no. Basically, we had a discussion here on this issue, and basically all of them were addressed, meaning that, yeah, we know how to do that. Some of them are just addressed right now. So for example, for private link, we can just use custom VNet and it will close the issue. For private ACR, it's an ongoing process. As far as I know, this one is also under construction, so the work is being processed here. Yeah, in order to actually meet the requirements of secure AKS baseline, those things should be fixed. However, I can't say that any of these things is actually a blocker of using CATI or CABC for provision AKS clusters. The blocker, what is really the blocker when we communicate to the customers is that it's still experimental, which is stated clearly on the website. So the support of AKS managed clusters is experimental, and everybody, okay, it's experimental, so we don't. It's interesting, cool, but no, we don't do that, even for our dev or experimental environments. So this is kind of a blocker, and we cannot push through that.
I see David has his hand raised. So you have a question?
Thank you. And Eugene, thank you very much for the demo. Not my question, but I'll speak to the experimental side. That's definitely something that we've heard from multiple users, and definitely something that we want to address in the future. So I don't think that interface is going to change all that much. I think we just need to have a discussion of when we start to say, yeah, it's stabilized. And also in the CAPI meeting yesterday, we talked about moving machine pool into the out of experimental and making the breaking change of moving it into the API group for all of the rest of the APIs. So I think when that change happens, it'll be much more likely that we will take the change and move out of the experimental group and into the regular API group for these resources.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, totally.
Awesome.
So yeah, I understand that you don't know when it's going to happen, but at least they are moving toward that and considering that.
Yes.
I mean, like, yes, this should be done. We need to go beyond the experimental. This is actually promising.
Yes. My actual question is this. It seems complex to set up this Git flow setup. So how do we make this easier? How do we get people up and running with this quickly? Because clearly we all want to do it. It's awesome. It's cool. How do we get the people set up quickly, and how do we make sure that they're set up in a way that's going to help them be successful?
So basically, you just need to follow this guidance. And set up it quickly. So it's if it is difficult, like you said, so yeah, it's an interesting feedback. Probably the first one who said it's difficult. It would be nice to understand why it is difficult. Why it is difficult, because basically it's a short article how to do that all. Yep, this one. So it's based on that repository that I showed you, and you just need to follow this article, which includes everything, including installation of CATI on your cluster, how to define a new cluster.
Go ahead, David.
You're good.
Eugene, that is a fantastic. Please, could you drop the link in there? I'll definitely make sure it's added to the notes here. I am sure that article is fantastic and will help anybody get started. But imagine all the steps that had to go into that article. Is there a way that we can set people up without them having to do all that? So when I imagine this, coming from a web developer background, like when I was introduced to Rails, I could say, Rails create new, and it spun up a new project, and all the bells and whistles were there. It was ready to go. It was really cool. I could just say, run, and I had my controllers and my views, and everything was right there, ready to go. All I had to do is just manipulate a few things. Really, my dream, my hope is that we can get to that same point with a Git flow kind of layout. Like if we had some kind of tool like lay down, hey, this is the way this goes. This is how you should lay out your directory, and just git push or git open a PR, and you're all set. You're ready to start. If we can get people to that point, I think it makes it so much easier. It opens the door to a whole new group of people. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but this is actually the goal what we are doing. So this is the goal of this repository. So this repository contains a pattern how you should organize your infrastructure and your cluster. So just clone it, define your configurations. It's stated here where you need to define that. Define your clusters, make it PR, and you're good to go. So this is the goal of this rep, exactly what you just said.
I think David is looking for more automation, but James also has a question. Let's see if it's related.
Yeah, thanks. So this is where I see like the tool that Matt's working on comes into play, where you can say, hey, create a cluster, and it goes out and provisions the Git repositories for you, drops all these things into it, and kind of wires everything together so that you can have kind of from 0 to running very quickly. So
like Bedrock can provision the repositories for you, so they can do that. But in practice, it appears to be even more complicated than just have a template of a repo, clone it, and massage it to your purposes. Then configure that tool to provision the repositories in the right way for you. In practice, people just refuse to use Bedrock because actually, even though it's supposed to simplify things, it brings more complexity.
Yeah, I did a demo, or I have a project that I worked on where we made it so that you could take different types of strategies on how you would set these things up. I'll see if I can pull up the link and drop it in there, but I think
sure.
there's definitely room for being able to automate this and still have a little bit of flexibility for folks to be able to design and use it the way they want to use it. So, but
yeah, there's actually a whole area of improvement about this multi-cluster setup. For example, what I showed is just actually defining just directly a cluster or any infrastructure here and creating a PR and merging. There's no actually like a flow, a process that this YAML that I created should be validated, should be tested, should be checked if it is even valid before actually creating a PR. So there could be some pipelines checking that in an automated way and providing the normal flow. So there is area of improvement here, and yeah, this is what we are working with. This is what we are looking into to work next, to improve and enrich this multi-cluster setup in order to make it more usable and easier for people to use.
Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to chime in since David and James are both kind of pointing at the same thing, which if it wasn't clear, I have an extension to the AZ client that's supposed to wrap up the general workflow for CapZ and simplify things as much as possible. And it doesn't do any of this yet, but the very next step that we want to attempt is essentially installing Flux and sort of enforcing a Git flow world by default. Because as you pointed out here, it's a great fit. So I think
yep.
I think something like that could be flexible enough to maybe provision what you're showing us here, and then there could be a tool that so you don't even have to go through this You just have your environment set up the way we want it
Yeah.
here
Yeah, that would be great.
at some point.
I think you mentioned that before, Matt, but is it something you're ready to show us maybe next time or something, or is it still in the early stages?
It's still pretty early. I'm still just working on the basic workflow. I mean, it does work
Mhm.
for provisioning a cluster, deleting a cluster, listing, working with the management clusters and all that, but none of the Flux or Git flow stuff have we attempted yet. It's just a great idea that David put out there, but hopefully soon.
Okay. 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 I think. Thank you everybody for this. But let's move on to other items in the agenda. Let me just share. I think the next one is James, Windows CI failures.
I thought there was somebody else in there before me. Did it get removed?
Was that? Oh, that was, we covered it. It was the secure AKS was already, we
Okay.
talked about both of them.
Yeah, so yesterday, the Windows jobs just started failing very consistently. We had a flake that I was kind of slowly looking into, but yesterday it seems to be failing pretty regularly, like I'd say 80% of the time. So I'm working on, we don't have any logging, or the logging doesn't work properly for Windows, so I'm adding support to collect the logs, because I've been spinning up clusters locally, but haven't run into the issues that we're seeing in the CI. And so I am working on that, but it'll probably be later today before I can get the logs out to be able to figure out what's going on, to be able to fix it. And so I wasn't sure if we want to make that PR optional, or it's just one particular job that's failing very regularly. I think it's the VMAS job, not the VMSS job. And so I just wanted to see what others thought on that.
I tried, there were a couple of PRs that were already approved, and I ran it this morning and it passed. So it's a little bit better than yesterday. So it's like still flaky, like the normal flaky that we've seen before, different than yesterday where it was extremely flaky. So I personally don't want to disable it because I think it's important to have it, but I don't know, let's see what everybody else thinks.
Yeah, I just want to make sure it wasn't blocking anybody. So if it's improved a little bit, then I should have it fixed out, in the next few days.
Yeah, I think we can wait a couple more days. There's no like urgent PRs or releases. If we can get it done, if it like takes like a week to figure it out, then maybe we can disable it. But I would say we can live with this for like 2-3 days or something. Does everybody agree to that, or does anybody disagree? Okay, David, thumbs up, and Matt. And okay, everybody's happy with it.
Okay, great, thanks.
Okay, I think this was the last item. I don't have this item, but I just noticed, like David, you created an issue code placeholder. This looks very suspicious.
I apologize. I didn't mean for it to be suspicious. It is a placeholder to a placeholder. There's a security placeholder out in KK repo, and this links out to it.
Yeah,
it's
I
something that we should do.
went to the issue like that you're linking to, and it also says placeholder and no information. So I wasn't sure. Is like a CVE coming or something? I don't know.
I believe so. So that's just a placeholder for us to fix whatever issue comes up from that placeholder. So not to be cryptic about it, but
The plan is still.
There's no information.
But this is basically just making sure we incorporate the next patch release at this point is the strategy, right? Yeah. Okay.
Precisely. That's all. And maybe, you know what? That's a great thing to put in there. Just update next patch release.
A little less cryptic.
Yeah, I was just following the same level of input that was in the placeholder issue.
That's fair. Okay, so that was the last one. Does anybody have any questions or topics they want to bring up? We It might be. Okay, I guess not. So I think that's it. So thank you everybody for attending and for all the discussion, and thank you Eugene for the cool work and the demo and the discussion. And we're looking forward to seeing Matt's stuff in the near future. And I think that's all. And see you all on Slack and on PRs. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks,
Thank
Nader.
you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.